We're going to learn how to solve equations by factoring. But first, remember, an equation with one variable with an exponent of 1 only is solved using the addition and multiplication properties of equality to get in the form x equals some number, like x equals 5, for example. So here's an example, 3x minus 2 equals x plus 8. That's an example of a linear equation, and I subtracted x and added 2 to both sides. That's using the addition property of equality to get 2x equals 10, and then I divided both sides by 2, which is the same as multiplying by 1/2, to get it in the form x equals 5 and solve. So this is a linear equation, and we don't have to use factoring to solve linear equations. But if you have a quadratic equation, you'll need to solve by factoring. So what is a quadratic equation? It can be written in the form ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. Now, we've been solving expressions of this form, such as x squared plus x minus 12. We've been solving expressions, which means they're not equations. Notice it doesn't equal anything. Once I write equals 0, now I have an equation. So this is an example of a quadratic equation. When it's in this form, ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0, it's said to be in standard form. So this is the standard form of a quadratic equation. Now remember, a, b, and c are just the coefficients. Actually, c is the constant. And in this particular case, a is 1, b is 1, and c is negative 12. Well, notice I have an exponent on the variable. This isn't going to work to solve the way we did linear equations. Instead, we have to come up with some new tools, and we're going to use what's called the zero factor property. The zero factor property says if AB equals 0, then A equals 0 or B equals 0. Now, that's not the A and B up here in the quadratic equation. What it's basically saying is if you have two numbers, let's say, that when you multiply them together you get 0, then one of those numbers must be 0. For instance, if I have two numbers and I say it's 0, well, it can't be like 1 times 5. One of those numbers has to be 0. So either the first number has to be 0, and this could be, any number you feel like, right? Or the second number would be 0, and I'll call this number 1, or I'll call this number 2. One of those numbers has to be 0. And in fact, if you have 10 numbers multiplied together, then the same applies. At least one of those numbers has to be 0. Any other two numbers you multiply together will not be 0. One of them must be 0 if the answer is going to be 0, if the product is going to be 0. So let's go back to our quadratic equation, x squared plus x minus 12 equals 0. Here's the key. I have a 0 on the right-hand side. If I could factor the left-hand side, then I know one of those factors is going to have to be 0 to make this true. All right, so you would get out some scratch paper and use any method you want to factor x squared plus x minus 12. So we know that's an x and an x, and the right combination is 4 and 3 to get 12, but I need it to be negative 12, and I need the middle term to add up to plus 1, and it happens to be x plus 4 times x minus 3. So I factored x squared plus x minus 12 equals 0, and now I've got it in the form that I could use the zero factor property. So one of these factors must be 0. If either, they could both be 0, but certainly one of them has to be 0. So x squared plus x minus 12 equals 0. X plus 4 times x minus 3 equals 0. Now, how are we going to use the property? We take each factor and we say, well, if the first factor was equal to 0, we'd have a solution. Or, it's not and, or the other factor, which is x minus 3. If that was 0, I'd have a solution. This gives me two solutions, x equals negative 4 or x equals 3. So I have two solutions, negative 4 and 3. And of course, we are going to check those solutions. Okay, so let's check. First, let's check to see if negative 4 is a solution. So you have to take the original problem, x squared plus x minus 12 equals 0. And let's just do this with a t-chart. We're going to put in negative 4 for x. So x squared, remember, is x times x. So I'm going to put in negative 4 times negative 4 plus a negative 4 minus 12. All right, negative 4 times negative 4 is 16. Plus negative 4 plus negative 12, and yes, that does add up to 0, and on the right side it's 0. So yes, that's a solution. And then you would also do this for 3. Check to make sure x equals 3. So let's do the same thing. We're going to take the x times x plus 12x minus 12. So we're going to do 3 times 3 plus 3 minus 12, which is 9 plus 3 minus 12, and that's also 0, so that's also a solution. So this means that negative 4, 3 is a correct answer. Now what does that mean? There is more than one solution. X could be negative 4, or x could be 3. That's something different about quadratics. Quadratic equations might have two different numbers that can be solutions. It does not mean that for one of the x's you're going to put in a negative 4 and the other one you're going to put in a 3. It means either you replace the x with negative 4 all the way through and it's a true equation, but you also get a true equation when you replace all the x's you see with 3. Right, so this is solving a quadratic equation by factoring. Here's another one. 3x times x minus 7 is 0. Now actually there are 3 factors on the left. The left-hand side is already factored. We don't actually have to factor it this time, and it's set equal to 0. In order to use the zero product property, you must have a 0 on one side of the equation and the other side has to be completely factored. Now, I've got 3 factors, but the first factor is 3, and obviously 3 is never going to be 0. So when you're going to use the property, you're going to take any factors that don't have, any factors that do have a variable in them. So we're going to take x and say that could be 0, or x minus 7 equals 0. So if I add 7 to both sides, I get 2 solutions. So my solutions are 0 or 7. There are 2 different solutions. Now what if you had thought of this 3x as one big factor? It's going to work out. Check this out. If you had just written 3x, in other words, you thought of this as 3x, just 2 factors, one factor being 3x and the other factor x minus 7, it all works out. If I would have written 3x equals 0, then I would have just divided both sides by 3, and I still would have gotten x equals 0. Now to check this, you're going to plug in 0 and see if it works. So you're going to check x equals 0 into 3x times x minus 7 equals 0. All right, so let's replace it. So I have 3 times 0 times 0 minus 7. And I hope you believe that's going to give you a 0, no matter what, because of that red 0 right here in the middle. So yep, it checks. you're going to get 0 equals 0. If you want, you could first write 3 times 0 times negative 7, but you're still going to get that this is a solution. Yes. And now we're going to check x equals 7. So we're going to put in 3 times 7 minus 7. Does that equal 0? Well, that's 21 times 0. Yep, that's also going to equal 0. Okay, so we're going to do some more of these in the next video.